Are you okay there, Socks? Are you going to sit there quite comfortably? I think he is, but he's facing away from the camera. What's that? He was singing for a second. Did you hear him? Oh. Somewhere, Angela Carter says that cats have a permanent smile. The first book I ever saw by her was her alphabet of cats, painted by, is it Martin Lehman, I think. It was a series of paintings of cats. And then she did the text. Oh, it's here. That's one of the few times that's worked out. Look. Comic and Curious Cats by Angela Carter. He's actually singing. This must have been in the 1980s, and it was the first time I encountered her work, 1979. I love my cat with an A because he is amiable, amenable, altogether adorable. His name is Abednego. He lives in Appletree Wick. He artfully eats artichokes. You get the gist of what she's doing. I love my cats with a B and C because they are beautiful and capricious, beatific if clamorous, brisk yet calm. Their names are Basil and Clarissa. They live in Brandon Creek. They eat begonias and carnations, to my bewildered consternation. Oh, it's a lovely book. I forgot how nice it was. I love my cat with a JKL. Because she is joking, kindly, loving, jumping, kinetic, light-footed, judicious, knowing, lyrical. Her name is Jackie Lynn. She lives in Clapham Junction, London. She eats jelly babies, kohlrabi and licorice, just as quick as lightning. Angela Carter was the subject of my PhD back in the early 90s. I got to know her work through doing the Women Writers course at Lancaster University when I was doing my undergraduate degree. And part of the course was The Bloody Chamber, her, again, 1979, rewrites of fairy tales. And I couldn't get hold of a copy for some reason. It was out at the bookshop. The library copies were gone. It was quite a big course, so they were out of the library all the time. And so I got Nights at the Circus instead for the seminar I was doing. And I took that out of the library. And that's a huge compendious mock Victorian novel about an aerialist with wings who's raucous and noisy and narrates her own story. And it's as we used to say in the 90s, a carnivalesque and transgressive magical realist novel about a trip that a mysterious circus takes across Russia. I just ate this book up, and then I think managed to get hold of The Bloody Chamber straight afterwards and gobbled that up as well, ready for the seminar that we had. And after that, it became a bit of an obsession. I hadn't realised that there was a writer like that who could blend what I felt was fairy tale and fantasy and magical realism and science fiction and all the genres that I loved into the same place, and be rude and silly and funny and clever. And it seemed that all the theory we were learning at Lancaster in the early 90s, or the late 80s into the early 90s, was there in her books. It was a very advanced series of courses that we did. Literary theory was very heavily promoted, feminism, nascent queer studies, and post-colonialism. And a kind of, I forget the word for it now, historical materialism were the order of the day, really. Very postmodern. He's still singing. Um, and so we were very up to the minute, and we applied all these theories to all our literary texts, and um, and it was great. They fell apart before us like magic boxes. Angela Carter knew all the answers already. Her books already had the answers there, or they had false bottoms in their magic boxes. She knew, she'd read the theory as well, and she'd kind of put surprises in store for you. She was cleverer than lots of the literary critics, and that was exciting and funny as well. I went on to read everything through the next year or so. I did my MA in creative writing, but while I was doing that, I applied for a PhD, and it was going to be on Angela Carter. And I applied for all the funding and all that business. And I'd seized on this image of the transgressive trans character, basically, in all of her books. The person who moves between the genders and drags up and dresses up and creates an identity from scraps and patches of culture as much as clothing, and scraps and patches of stories and from different genres. So the whole thesis was going to be about that. And she died. She died at about that time. It was the beginning of 1992 when I was applying for that stuff and doing my MA, and the news suddenly was that she died at the age of 52. Which only kind of reinforced my desire to do a thesis about her and carry on reading her. And I knew she was important. I knew she was important to me, but culturally as well. And it turned out lots of people applied for funding to work on Angela Carter. After that, she became very voguish, as people often do when they've died, writers. And the line was that year that more people applied to do a PhD on Angela Carter in 1992 than they did for anything pre-1800, apparently. Which I think would be quite flattering if you heard that. Anyway, I got the funding and I did it. Out of all the people who went for it, so I was glad. And I spent 3 years writing this thesis, and spending all my time immersed in her work. The reason she's come back into my head is getting a copy of this. They've renamed it Angela Carter's Book of Fairy Tales. I read it in 2 volumes in the early 90s when it was the Virago Book of Fairy Tales, 1 and 2, edited by Angela Carter. This is quite a nice edition. They've kept the woodcuts that were done especially for the series of tales. Print's quite small. That's always part of my reviews, isn't it? They are world fairy tales, so she's taken them from here, there, and everywhere, and rewritten them. Not quite in her own style. She gives them style, but it's not her telling them in the way it is when she does The Bloody Chamber or Fireworks. They're often rude and they're capricious and not traditional to us. There's somebody's tradition each time, of course, but they seem to break the rules of storytelling as far as we're concerned. I guess in our culture, we're used to fairy tales, whether it's, Perrault or the Grimms or Disney. We're used to tales being taken and then tied up with a bow and made to mean something. And that's often been the way, hasn't it? Whether it's a moral, or whether it's a Hollywood ending, or whether it's something that makes story arc sense. Do the characters grow by the end of it? These characters, Angela Carter's characters generally, but the ones from the tales that she collects, don't care about growing or psychological development or becoming better people by the end of it. Very odd thing. When I was lecturing 10 years after my PhD, bless, and I was in at UEA and teaching novels, teaching the contemporary novel, teaching the 1960s novel, I found that lots of the students, and I guess they're millennials, I guess they were the first of that kind of generation, would often say the first thing they would reach for was, how do the characters become better people by the end of it? And it was a real concern with them, as if that was the point of novels somehow. And it had never occurred to me that was a big factor. So when we're doing books like Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange, they were very concerned about Alex becoming better by the end of it and learning from the process, which I thought was curious. Angela Carter wouldn't have held much, wouldn't have given that much time of day, really. Her characters often end up worse, and the things they learn put them in a worse place. It's not always self-knowledge is always a good thing, but it doesn't put you in a necessarily better place. She's a materialist and a realist. A realist in the sense that she has realistic expectations of how awful life can be, I guess. But she's not a realist in a generic sense. There's a moth coming at me. I think it's Virginia Woolf getting her revenge. Anyway, so Angela Carter and her fairy tales are in my head at the moment, which is nice. It also, thinking about fairy tales, made me go off and rewatch some of The Storyteller, Jim Henson's wonderful 1980s show, written and I think directed by, maybe just written by, Anthony Minghella. I've got the book here. Again, I've got one to hand. I haven't prepared this, they're just close at hand. This is a nice edition. I found the retellings in book form actually slightly verbose compared with the it's nicely illustrated. The TV show is so swift and so succinct. The episodes are 22 minutes long, and each one is a different world fairy tale, usually European, usually 18th to 19th century. The actual prose versions I found slightly sticky and verbose, which is a shame, but maybe I should go back to it. It's a nice book. It deserves another go. The illustrations are very faithful to the TV show. Very faithful to the TV show. Oops. And we have just a touch of the same atmosphere. Anyway, The Storyteller is probably one of my favourite TV shows there's been. Obviously, Doctor Who is my favourite, but something to be said for a show that doesn't last very long, that is entirely there, sufficient unto itself, like The Storyteller, and its short sequel with Michael Gambon doing Greek tales in a few episodes. And The Golden Girls is my other all-time favourite, of course, which again lasts for 7 seasons, and that's it. I don't talk about The Golden Palace. Anyway, that's a detour into favourite TV. I'm thinking about Angela Carter and fairy tales and dipping into a few other collections of tales, which is nice. A nice thing to do in the summer amongst my other reading. I'm still reading James Griffith's book about Squeeze, and enjoying his account of the rise of punk rock and what that meant to properly working class pub rockers of the time, when all these slightly middle class suburban boys became punks in their midst. And that's an interesting tale. I'm coming to the end of Alfred Bester's The Star's My Destination, so my science fiction reading is going on. And I'm still reading Lem Sisay's My Name is Why. But still, the best thing I've read, and I think I blagged on about this the other day, is still Find Me by Andre Aciman, or Achiman. I must find out how you say his name. I'm resisting going book shopping. There's no way in the world I need more books, but I'm very tempted to buy his latest book. Anyway, Socks is now fast asleep. Aren't you, Socks? He sang himself to sleep. Anyway, I'll say goodbye and... Oh, I've woken him. I'll see you again soon in the next episode.